14, Dancing Through the Crack. Operational thinking. On the island of Bali, 7-year-old girls are chosen to be trance dancers. Immediately on being so honored, they join the older girls and women in rituals that include stately dancing over coals of fire. Ernst Hilgard of Stanford University found that children become highly susceptible to suggestion at age 7. This suggestibility peaks around ages 8 to 11 and fades around age 14. At 7, the child undergoes a brain growth spurt and a dramatic shift of logical processing. Because individuality is just becoming functional at 7, the purpose of the new logic and the new learning capacity is to gain self-sufficiency or autonomy, independence, and the ability to survive in the world. The 7-year-old is ready to learn how to interact dynamically with the new matrix, the earth, by means of his or her new logic. She is ready to learn that when she or he gestures to the earth gestures back, just as the mother did. Through interchanges of this sort, events beyond the ordinary concreteness of the earth can take place. Through such use and practice, the child develops the tools of logic, now opening just as she or he developed his or her first tools and logic through interaction with the mother. A knowledge of the world has been roughed in, and the details now begin to be filled in. These details are what the reality of world plus child can mean. The new logic is for the unconscious work of the conceptual brain. In balance and harmony with the world, to move in synergy with the conscious play of the new individual. Although always on behalf of physical survival, for which play has prepared the child, through interaction, through assimilation, accommodation, cycle can complete fantasy plays previously left incomplete and make them real, the world bending to the inner desire as needed for well-being or protection. The 7-year-old is designed to learn this bending of the world by imitating an adult model. When the child accommodates his or her body to the adult model, a full cycle takes place. His or her logic assimilates the act and things begin to change both internally within his or her concepts and externally within his or her reality. In the new logic of individuality, creative relations can take place between the two systems in the brain, the world structure within the primary process and the self system. The brain hologram is now essentially complete, and it can reflect back on its larger earth hologram and relate creatively. Now, world system and child mind assimilate and accommodate as an interacting unit of relations and produce events beyond the possibilities of either system alone. The only difference between the reality experience resulting from the new creative logic and the previous fantasy play reality lies in the accommodations between earth and child. To the child, of course, play is play. Piaget gives this logic the formidable title of concrete operational thinking. Concrete means what it says, the tangible world and its processes. Operational refers to a controlled alteration of materials, as in the operational rules of a game, operating a machine, or a doctor operating on his or her victim. In operational thinking, the mind-brain operates on its information and changes that information's structure. Thinking still means action for the 7-year-old and does so up to age 10 or 11.
So again, there is no distinction between thinking and the action in the child, okay? He thinks and he does it. There is no distinction between that. This is important here.
This rootedness in body action is the reason operational thinking is concrete at this stage. The new logic can organize only around and out of what the brain has at its disposal, the concrete concepts of the actual world, as structured in those first 7 years. The brain system cannot accept or assimilate information that does not have a sufficient number of points of similarity with its existing conceptual system. Through concrete operational thinking, the child's mind brain can operate on and make transformations of its incoming sensory information so long as that information is concrete.
So this information is concrete means that it is still coming from the, which the child can feel. It's not still not abstract over here.
Throughout the earlier formative period, concepts were constructed from the child's sensory interactions with the world. At 7, concepts can be constructed on creative ideas concerning that world. A concept based on an idea rather than on something of the world is an abstraction, and the kinds of abstractions the child brain can assimilate at 7 are those that can be drawn out of or detached from the concrete concepts. During the first 7 years, when accurate world structuring was vital, imagination did not become conceptual. The brain did not accommodate to fantasy ideas. The matchbox certainly did not become the boat as far as the world or that matchbox was concerned. The brain dismissed all dissimilarities and gave a play reality experience that left the vital concrete elements of world orientation strictly alone.
So this is like the virtual games and all people play, that virtual reality thing. This is exactly like that.
At 7, the brain can construct concepts out of imaginative ideas or possibilities that apply to the immediate reality, and such a pattern then functions as any other concept does, as a pattern by which the brain puts together sensory information. An abstract concept based on an idea about something can put together the stimulus information coming from that thing. The abstract pattern acts on that stimulus according to the idea about its source rather than on its actual structure. And that, roughly, is how operational thinking operates on its incoming sensory information. The Balinese child, by imitating her superiors, operates on her incoming sensory information and changes it. She knows, without thinking about it, that the fire will not burn her because she sees the other dancers and knows that they do not get burned. She knows that by imitating their body gestures, she too will have their powers over the world and go unharmed. This is what she has unconsciously practiced in imitative plays for years. The difference now is that, with her new logic and new brain growth, her imitative movements bring about a corresponding concept of action patterns in her brain. As always, and just as non-consciously, thus she bends some aspect of the world to her desire, not by some intellectual knowing of how to manipulate information, but by the same kind of automatic work within her brain that makes all conceptual growth and change possible. Her system operates on the incoming information through a combination of patterns, those from the world of cause and effect, and those from the idea system of her models. The individual piece of the hologram, that is her brain, now functionally clarified and able to reflect the whole, can change some point of the total structuring. In the interaction of matrix and child, the matrix reflects the change and so moves beyond itself. The child's sensory information must bring in reports of the fire, the flesh, and the effects of the two. That is what her primary world concepts and body knowing are designed to do. However, this information is contrary to her well-being and concrete operational thinking. Having been given through suggestion a model for another possibility, follows suit and operates on the information, changing it into something more compatible. Her thinking bends the world out there to the inner desire not to be injured. All that is needed is for the child to furnish the function. Her mind brain furnishes the structure. The only way the function can be furnished is the actual physical interaction. The assimilation accommodation cycle, which was missing in fantasy play, is filled in by the new logical capacities. The play on the surface and the conceptual work beneath it merge as needed or as opportunity arises. To be appropriate to the needs of the child at this stage, suggestions given must have sufficient points of similarity to the concrete world immediately available to the child. The child's concrete concepts give an accurate knowledge of the world and accurate orientation. But even as these concepts formed in those 7 years, a parallel fantasy played on this concreteness without in any way changing it. The pianist plays on the piano, a piano tuner operates on it and changes its structure, keeping it in top form and harmony. The child's conscious self plays on the world, logic and intellect operate on and keep the instrument, the child's body, properly tuned and in harmony with the world. The wonder is, both performers, world structure and child structure, mind brain, perform on the same instrument at the same time and in keeping with the needs of each. That is what the division of labor was about. The concepts of world organization formed by seven are inviolate. The playing has not changed the instrument. Furthermore, these primary concepts are the means by which the communion with the earth and flow of energy are maintained. To grasp how people walk on beds of fire, we must understand how concrete operational thinking involves a primary process that includes the world and its offspring, the person. The findings of biology and physics no longer allow the assumption that world and mind are separate elements. A world without thinking would have no life. It is thinking that creates a planet different from, say, the dead moon, assuming it is dead. There is no way to distinguish planet from its planetary life any more than there is to distinguish a live body with the life of its cell. Remove the life from its cell, and you have a different body. Earth without life would be a corpse. To assume that a relationship does not exist between the cells of life produced by the large body of life is ridiculous. To assume that individual life can exist without accommodation and provision by the host body Earth is ridiculous. The examples given in chapter 14 were of phenomena not possible without a general field of awareness or a hologram effect between Earth and organism. The fact that this function is not available to rational academic thought hardly means that the effect is not there as part of the Earth's processes. We did not know of the Van Allen radiation belt until recent machinery detected it, but the aurora borealis operated right along in spite of our ignorance. In the same way, evidence clearly points to the living Earth interacting with her creatures, and the more complex the brains involved, the greater the possibilities of interaction. The child's own experience and knowledge are only a small part of the information and possibly available through his or her primary process, but the conceptual set in his or her brain is the only means through which any of this potential can be made available to him or her. His or her communion with the flow of life must itself be grouped into meaningful patterns by the brain if volitional conscious interaction is to take place. Patterns for communion and interaction with the earth must be nurtured and developed as diligently at age 4 and again at age 7, as such patterns with the mother were at birth, else they atrophy. In the examples of the Eskimo and animals, I showed how their relationship with their environment included a range of communion beyond their long-range senses of sight and sound. In the same way, the child has relations with his world beyond sensory range, and these concern his well-being in the same way as those of the animals do. But no matter how clearly nature might signal, as with the fox on the riverbank, the child must have the necessary receptors developed to receive and comprehend those signals. The only way these receptors can be developed is to be used, which means, of course, recognized and encouraged by parental nurturing. The possibilities for creatively interacting with the world at age 7 are of a different order of logic from primary perceptions. Perceptions are passive, we receive them. Operational thinking is active, we must do it, but as usual, intent must receive its content from without. The possibilities for doing must be given the child through specific modeling in an actual situation that the child can imitate and so bring about the conceptual growth. The child's own imagination still gives only fantasy play, which never changes the conceptual world structure. The concrete concepts about the world can, of themselves, offer only the concrete world experience. Fire can, of itself, only burn. The world offers no abstractions out of itself. It has created the human mind brain to do that. To grasp an idea means to construct that idea in formation in your brain. At 7, this can be done only by relating the suggested idea to the concepts that make up the child's brain patterns, which are concrete. She or he can grasp abstractions only if she can act them out in his or her immediacy. His or her thinking is still tied to action. To be appropriate to the needs of the child at this stage, suggestions given must have sufficient points of similarity with the world immediately available to him or her. Physical modeling by parent or guide is the way nature has designed learning for this period. Suggestions can be verbal if given one step at a time in the immediate context of the physical action. But modeling coupled with verbal cueing is far more powerful. Remember the children pressing the rubber bulb by shouting go? Nature has provided that this body language unit remain in force as a vital role in concrete operations. The Balinese child grasps the idea she seeks by making the corresponding movements at the same moment. A conceptual system patterns those movements because only by the patterns can the external movements take place. Jane Bellow, who studied the Balinese dancers years ago, was struck by the fact that the child could immediately execute the intricate dances with such polished skill. Consider that the child has watched such dancing all her life. Such rituals filled a large part of Balinese culture. That imitative play is a part of child life, and that physical movements can be roughed in just by watching. Edmund Carpenter relates how 11 and 12-year-old inner city children were taken to stables, shown saddle horses for the first time, and told they could ride. The youngsters immediately rushed to the horses, leaped skillfully onto them, and rode, galloping away with astonishing skill, just as they had observed hero models do on television for years. Those actions were thoroughly ingrained as a kind of empty category simply awaiting the chance to be filled in. The fact that television is the most powerful influence on these children, as the cultural rituals are for the Balinese, is an issue to which I will return in chapter 17. When the Balinese child follows the same pattern in imitating her heroine models, she may also be simply filling in, with her new logic, patterns roughed in visually over the years. A man came to a magical child seminar as a result of an experience that had unnerved him and threatened his academic and rational worldview. His 8-year-old son was whittling with a knife, slipped and severed the arteries in his left wrist. Following an instant's panic at the sight of the spurting blood, the father, as if in a dream, seizing his screaming son's face, looked into his eyes and commanded, "Son, let's stop that blood." The screaming stopped. The boy beamed back, said, "Okay," and together they stared at the gushing blood and shouted, "Blood, you stop that." And the blood stopped. In a short time, the wound healed, and the father's world almost stopped as well. He knew disorientation and confusion. He could not account for his own actions or the words he had heard himself speak, and he surely could not account for the results. He did not understand that the child is biologically geared to take reality cues from the parent. He did not know of the high suggestibility of the 8-year-old, of concrete operational thinking, or that at this age his son was peculiarly susceptible to ideas about physical survival. but some part of him did know and broke through in the moment of emergency. All the son needed, of course, was the suggestion and the support. The creative logic unfolding during this late childhood period can be summed up as reversibility thinking, an ability that Piaget calls the highest act of human intelligence, but sadly, the rarest. Full reversibility thinking does not unfold until adolescence, but its early concrete form is what the examples I have cited have displayed. Reversibility thinking is, to use Piaget's description, the ability of the mind to entertain any state in a continuum of possible states as equally valid and return to the point from which the operation of mind begins. A simpler statement would be reversibility thinking is the ability to consider any possibility within a continuum of possibilities as true, knowing that you can come back to where you start from. This is what the child has been doing in his play for the first 7 years. Fantasy play is entertaining a possibility from a particular continuum as valid. And always the child came back to the point from which the venture began. The matchbox was once again just a matchbox. Now at 7, this play becomes a full operation, not just a fantasy reality on the surface of the concepts. The ability to accept outside possibilities means the ability to entertain them in the mind, assimilate them, and make an accommodation to them. A sharp qualification lies with the world continuum. A continuum is a logical grouping of those possibilities that fit. In fantasy play, anything can be anything else, only within strict limits. The matchbox offered a specific continuum determined by the box's characteristics and the related knowledge in the child's mind. The matchbox could be a bed, car, boat, wagon, treasure chest, and so on, all transformations within its point of similarity. The matchbox offered little possibility for being a doll, animal, soldier, or rocket ship, but a clothespin offers just such a continuum. An object that simply replicates something else offers nothing for this creative act. Creativity is precisely this capacity for seeing one thing in something else, seizing similarities and dismissing dissimilarities. At 7, this play capacity can become real if given the proper stimulus. Although to the child, reality is reality. Any concrete possibility suggested to the child becomes valid as long as the idea is suggested by modeling and has a sufficient number of points of similarity with his or her concrete world knowledge. Then the mind brain can assimilate as his or her body accommodates by a proper imitating. To entertain possibility, the child must be able to act on it. Ability depends on openness to ideas, which requires a certain freedom from the fear of the unknown, unpredictable. A sufficient number of points of similarity between the idea presented and the structure of knowledge, the flexibility of logic sufficient to restructure the dissimilarities, accommodate to the unknown, unpredictable elements, which is gained through practice, and the coordinating of mind-brain with muscular responses. The range of the body's physical capacities to respond enters into the range of general intelligence. The child's ability to synthesize and respond in this way is learned and developed by actual doing. If an idea or instruction given him falls outside his ability, he will simply be confused. Willful refusal is probably very rare because the child is geared to respond when the cues fit his stage of development. At age 7, children have a passionate longing for creative interactions and learning as they earlier had for explorations of the world. The mind-brain-body system wants to learn. That is what the brain growth spurt is for. The longing this brings about is a drive, just as the longing genital sexuality brings about is a drive. Learning is a non-conscious biological process and will take place automatically when the models given are appropriate to the needs. In cultures where children are allowed to interact with adults, these children immediately imitate adult survival practices during the years from 7 to 10 or 11. This is their play, and they develop great skill at it. The peculiar thing about culture has been that it takes the accidental form of creative logic or reversibility, thinking that occur and ritualizes them, turns these into religious acts instead of correlating them into fabric of action. Such ritualizing happened on Bali and among many Eastern cultures. Many times I have been asked if a child is not taught in the very beginning that fire burns, but instead is taught that fire does not burn, will she or he not be able to walk fire from the beginning? In effect, such a notion involves a number of misconceptions. First, of course, we do not teach the early child in this sense. The child learns through physical interaction with what is. That fire does not burn is a contradiction and an impossibility for the world or the fire. Unless the little Balinese girl had a full dimensional knowledge of her world, including the clear knowledge that fire burns if you touch it, she could not make the sophisticated abstraction that fire walking requires. In order to make a logical controlled operation on the sensory stimulus of fire on flesh, she must have accurate concepts from which and on which the necessary abstractions can be drawn and built. A sufficient number of points of similarity between actuality and idea must exist. Reversing the ordinary cause effect flow of life is possible only by having a conceptual pattern of that cause and effect. Fire walking is such a common occurrence in so many countries simply because of the universal experience of fire itself. The idea is assimilated so easily because the points of similarity are so great that the few points of dissimilarity needing accommodation are not overwhelming. The act is impossible and incomprehensible to thinking as thinking, but not to thinking as action. Thinking as thinking can rearrange only abstract patterns in the brain, and fire burning is a very concrete pattern. The only way an abstraction can be drawn out of this is actuality is for the body to go through the maneuvers. This concrete action can then act with the concreteness of the knowledge of fire burning and bring about an accommodation of the points of dissimilarity. When the Balinese child is chosen, blessed, or given power, she gets up engrossed, totally in imitating her models. Every part of the body must be coordinated in the intricate and sophisticated gestures, and these are the points of concentration. The dance is the function, the structuring of a reverse flow concerning the fire is incidental. In recent years, this part of the dance is apparently no longer observed. Generally, the fire was the one used for the preparation of the feast. Dancing through it was simply play. After the play, she returned to the point from which the operation of mind began. The ordinary world in which the fire burns. The little girl knew that she might get some of the festive food roasting beneath the coals and that she would have to be careful to avoid singeing her fingers. At this point, our Western logic breaks down before an unresolvable paradox. To us, you cannot have it both ways. You cannot dance on the coals without even a blister, while beneath those coals, pigs and pineapple or whatever are roasting. Frozen in our no man's land of confusion between world and reality, having lost the best of both worlds, the organization and the extent of our logic is either or. Between the either and the or lies a rigorously excluded middle that we Westerners feel we must maintain, else our whole semantic universe will collapse into chaos, as in fact it might. And through that excluded middle, ignorant of our logical niceties, the little Balinese child blithely dances. There are different ways by which the brain can operate on its data and change those data. The Balinese child simply imitates, and any reversing of ordinary cause and effect takes place peripherally and in true play. The father and son stopped the blood, and healing the wound did not reverse a process so much as directly operate on concrete material, which is the subject of chapter 17. Left to his own devices, the child would have bled to death. What they did was through verbal suggestion, the temporary power of the father and their combined interaction. On their own, the severed artery must bleed, the heart must pump, the fires must burn. They are the world's principles, subject to law, understandable by analysis, standardized by and predictable. They constitute the reality of the world, or we might say, physical reality. But add idea or abstraction and you add mind brain. Add mind brain to the world and you have not reality as it is in the world, but reality as a construction, a created reality. Human reality experience and the world as it is are not synonymous phenomena, although they partake of the same substance. This is why the laws of one operation cannot possibly fit the other. Why ordinary scientific testing, which is designed to discover the world's principles, is not appropriate for a study of earth plus mind. Fire walking, the most common of all non-ordinary phenomena, takes place all over the world: Greece, Africa, South America, the Southeast Islands, and almost everywhere in Asia. Recently, standard Ceylonese type fire walking has been done in Canada. A friend of mine, a university professor, took part in one a couple of years ago. Some of the walking is intense and serious, as in the case of the yearly rituals of the Ceylonese, in which they prepare for the venture with 3 months of partial fasting, abstinence, and prayer. The fire bed they walk, when all are seized, is a deep pit 20 feet across. The heat will melt aluminium on contact. A small percentage fail each year. Their faith snaps. Some of these are seriously crippled. Others are burned to death on the spot. The majority know ecstasy, the joy of survival of life over death. They dig their feet into the coals, scoop up handfuls, and heap them on their shoulders and heads. The hair never burns, nor do their garments. They revel in personal power bestowed by the gods. This personal power consists of a full dimensional knowledge of the world and its principles, the muscular mindedness to accept the stress of an unknown, unpredictable, and the logic necessary for abstracting out of concreteness, assimilating and accommodating, and so operating on that information and changing it. All the work of reconstruction goes on beneath the level of awareness. The person is asked only to respond. The conceptual system does the rest. I am continually asked by those caught in the Western no man's land of misplaced concreteness, but what kind of chemical molecular changes could the body put forth to alter the effects of fire on flesh? They are asking for an explanation of the reality created by world plus mind in terms of the limited principles of the world alone. The minute we add mind to the world, we get reality experience. Then our neat, either or logical analysis, which may work well with the world itself, no longer works. If a scientist mixed two chemicals in his beaker and got a certain predictable result, he would not likely then insist that he should get the same result from only one of the chemicals. Yet, our academic community does this continually with world and reality experience. Mind is the catalyst that changes the earth into created reality experience, precisely what the earth has moved towards in its 3 billion years of genetic experimentation. Separating mind from a world is a massive denial that splits our conscious awareness from our primary process. From his or her split state, the scientist and fellow victims rightly concludes that any two-way exchange between earth and human cannot exist. Nothing in that split awareness can act back on the hologram in such a manner. No summation of the unity of the earth as itself can give the infinite flexibility and possibility of world plus mind. The crippling insistence that the earth must on her own display the components of reality, experience arises from anxiety. The anxiety arises from our having never had the earth as our matrix. As intelligence, whose earth has never formed as matrix, can never find a safe place to stand. When the shift of matrix from mother to earth fails to take place, logic has no way to organize concrete patterns into abstractions. We spend most of our lives trying to learn some abstract patterns that our logic can organize. Our young people are beginning to show serious deficits in even this shallow form of abstraction, and we have attributed this to not starting them early enough in abstract thinking itself, but the diametric opposite in the case. We have failed to provide sufficient mature concrete matrices from which abstraction can truly arise. All the earth can do with the fire is burn as it is supposed to do. There is no chemical change in the fire or in the child when she walks that fire. There are no molecular shifts, no mind over matter, no mystical mumbo jumbo, no deep esoteric secrets of cosmic space, no hidden pyramid numbers or astrological trickery, no superpowers of flying saucer superminds. The relationship between concepts, sets, and functions in the mind brain changes, and the relations between mind and its matrix, between microcosmic and macrocosmic hologram, changes accordingly. The functional changes do not take place in awareness, they furnish awareness. Surely the child has no notion of how her reality
So
experience
this
of
is
fire.
important. The functional changes do not take place in awareness. They furnish the awareness. So what it's saying is whatever the child is thinking, that is what is manifesting. So thought responsive universe.
Where were we? Sorry. Surely the child has no notion of how her reality experience of fire does not burning unfolds for her other than if she does, it does. No more does any of us really know how it is that when we open our eyes, we see the world out there. The structure follows our function of opening our eyes. If the Balinese child did not respond with her single non-ambiguous yes to her intent by getting up and doing, if instead she asked our either of or kind of questions, the fire would not have had mind added to its equation and so would simply burn. When understanding structures precedes function, both function and the understanding suffer. Just as when work is thought to be necessary and play is thought to be something peripheral, the system bogs down. Through the function of play, the work takes place and creativity unfolds. The missing link of earlier child play is added to the abilities within that child at 7. She walks the fire in play, still responding only to intent as she did in her first hour. But what accommodates to what? The fire or the flesh? Ah, that is admittedly mystery, thank God. Mystery that keeps play and work neatly divided, although they must merge for creation. This is the paradox and the reason that play is the only way the highest intelligence of humankind can unfold.
So in the end, play is extremely important.
Should I continue?
So Niket,
बोलिए.
so we read about that part where the father tells the son that blood stop. How would you explain that
So what is
situation?
happening? The child's matrix is developed from the father and the mother, right?
Hmm.
And the child's matrix responds to a command given by the father.
Hmm.
So when the father commands, let's stop the blood flow, in the child's conceptual process, there is no reason why the blood flow will not stop if he commands it to stop. So it stops.
But the blood flow was a biological thing because he had cut himself, right?
That is what is being said over here, na? See over here in this page, what does she say? Where was it? Yeah, it's not here. See, let me explain this. Today, the matrix of the mother, the child gets all her information of
Hmm.
what is happening, what is real, what can work, what cannot work through the
Mm-hmm.
matrix of the mother in the first few years, right? Now,
Yeah.
mother
Yeah.
over here includes the mother and the father, what he has said.
Okay. Hmm.
So, anything that the father or mother says, the child
Hmm.
accepts as truth
Hmm.
because the child has no concept apart
Hmm.
from what the mother and father are telling the child. Are you getting that?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So now, since the father is saying stop the blood, in the child's view, because the child was only 8 years old, right? He's just
Hmm.
nearing that,
Hmm.
just across that 7-year barrier.
Yeah.
So the child assumes that if the father is saying stop the blood, it can stop. So in reality, it stops because ultimately it's a thought responsive universe, right?
Hmm.
So like we
Okay.
are going when we we are going to bring the spoon bending thing also. In that
Hmm.
also in one exercise we command the spoon to bend. That is one of the ways in which the spoon bends, and it actually responds to that in many cases.
Wow. Thank you.
So we are coming to the spoon bending now. Shimangla has gone somewhere.
The
No, I'm not
spoon
gone
bending
anywhere.
will happen if you command it.
Kya? What?
I said, if you command the spoon to bend, it will bend.
We'll get to that when we get to that, okay?
Nikit, whom else can we program to command?
See, if the
Oh, that's a good
see it all
question.
This is important.
see it all depends.
Question.
It all depends on the 1 to 7 year construct. If that reality is constructed in a person at that point in time, then automatically if the matrices are very solid, it can work. Definitely it can work.
Wow.
So if your kids are not listening to you, be sure that there was some problem in the matrix.
Oh God. Okay.
Chaliye.
The two-way flow, assimilation, accommodation. Uri Geller, for those readers who did not follow this minor-major comedy, was an Israeli entertainer who could apparently bend metal without touching it, make broken or stopped watches run for short periods, and occasionally make an object disappear, and who displayed undeniable extrasensory perception. Interested researchers tested Geller's abilities at the Stanford Research Institute in California. The tests were conducted by only one of the dozens of nearly autonomous departments making up this complex 3,000 employees, but those connected with the investigations, which went on for months, were convinced that the Geller effect was genuine. Papers stating this opinion were published and a storm of protest broke out, for academic dogma was brought into question. So Geller's discrediting was undertaken. Soon we Americans found out, to the disappointment of some and the relief of others, that Geller was a fraud, a charlatan, and a cheat. Time said so. Psychology Today said so. For after all, the amazing Randi, a professional magician, said so. Andrew Weil, who writes on natural and stoned minds and is an authority, said so. The amazing Randi, after all, told Andy, and when Psychology Today published at length Andy's lengthy report on Randi's expose, the circle closed. The evidence was in Geller was clearly guilty. The Stanford scientists who had been duped all those months grew silent, and Geller left the scene.
Okay, so this is very much like I don't know which book I was reading it in. There was an experimental drug for cancer. Okay. Now, they didn't know what the effect of the drug was, but then the researching company said it's a miracle drug, and anyone who takes the drug will definitely get cured. So this guy who had cancer, he took the drug and he immediately got cured. Okay. And then subsequently, after some time, research papers started coming out saying that that drug was not effective and it did not cure. Now, this guy who had got cured from cancer by taking that drug, after those research papers started coming out and people started talking about it, that it's not effective, he got cancer back again. So the same effect is over here. Are you all getting that? So Geller actually used to bend spoons, watches he used to repair. There's a movie about it also. We can watch it one of the days. And then when the other guy started saying that no, he cannot do it, he's a fraud, and certain authoritative figures started saying it, that resulted in people accepting that he was a fraud.
So this is what? Belief or faith?
No, you see, what happens is when this is what consciousness, that is a consensual reality, let's put it that way. Because we all believe in something, that becomes true.
Okay.
Basically, that's it.
Okay.
Then a funny thing happened. Jeller went to England in late 1973 to perform his fork bending stunts on television for the British Broadcasting Company. Jeller had observed that people in his audiences occasionally had keys bent in their pockets, rings twist and break on their fingers, and so on while he was doing similar things on the stage. The notion grew that perhaps Jeller could operate through people and maybe even at long distance, or perhaps other people might possess the same odd ability he did. On the English television show, Jeller invited all those people out there in television land to join him, to participate in his metal bending by holding forks or spoons themselves, to see if the phenomenon might be repeated. Some 1,500 reports flooded the BBC, claiming that forks, spoons, anything handy had indeed bent, broken, moved about there in the homes of Britain.
Okay, so there have been occasions in the institute, there are few people, when they set their mind to bend something, the forks twine start to move. And I've actually seen it happen. Okay, sitting on the table, the fork twine suddenly starts to move up.
Surely such hysterical claims are often noted, and no validity can be granted such business at all. The funny thing was, the vast majority of the claimants were between ages of 7 and 14, the period of suggestibility and concrete operational thinking. The exceptions were a few women, many of whom were not actually holding utensils but found broken bent and twisted spoons and such after the show. When Jello appeared in Scandinavia, Germany, South Africa, and Japan, there were repeat performances. Spoon bending became a popular epidemic. The age bracket ran from 7 to 14 fairly consistently, and the average age was 9. Had this outbreak occurred in United States, analytical psychologists out to defend the strange fantasies of Freud, the brass tack realists, the Skinner box behaviorists would have written learnedly about the deep anxiety syndromes operating to produce such illusions. Agreeing sagely with one another, they would have explained it all the way.
So now
In
you
England,
understand, most of the crowd or the people who are in charge want to protect their fiefdom. The reason that Donald Trump is getting astrocated everywhere because he's out of the box guy. He doesn't confer with the system. He does what he feels like doing. So that's why it creates a big disharmony in the people who are in control.
In England, Germany, Scandinavia, South Africa, and Japan, the reaction was different. At the University of London, for instance, the physics department, headed by John Halstead and under the direct supervision of mathematician physicist John Taylor, made a genuine scientific response. Just as Aristotle decided to test the common knowledge that salamanders could live in fire by tossing an actual salamander into the fire, whereupon the poor salamander fried to a crisp. So these English scientists tossed some reported jeller salamanders into the fire. They brought a number of the children into the laboratory and began working with them. Following a slow period in which little happened, the children really began to catch fire. In that encouraging and patient atmosphere, fog bending in many guises began to assert itself. In effect, each laboratory experiment proved another strong suggestion. Each success contributed to the set of expectancy that was beginning to generate. Success breeds success.
So now, if one person can do it, then the other guy does it. And slowly everyone can do it. I've seen this happening in workshops also.
During the same period and operating within his own circuit, Matthew Manning, an English teenager, had been doing Geller-type acts since experiencing a poltergeist seizure at 11 years of age. Dr. Brian Josephson of the prestigious Cavendish Laboratories at Cambridge University, where DNA's double helix was born, winner of the 1973 Nobel Prize in Physics and a principal in the investigation of young Manning, said,
Okay. So over here, polterologist. You all know what polterologist is? Polterologist is where things suddenly start to move. Things will suddenly appear out of nowhere. Things will start to vibrate and move. This is what polterologists do.
A redefinition of reality and non-reality is needed now. We are on the verge of discoveries which may be extremely important for physics. We are dealing here with a new kind of energy. This force must be subject to laws. I believe ordinary methods of scientific investigation will tell us much more about psychic phenomena. They are mysterious, but they are no more mysterious than a lot of things in physics already. In times past, respectable scientists would have nothing to do with psychical phenomena. Many of them still won't. I think that respectable scientists may find they have missed the boat.
So what happens? Instrumentation has its limitation. And also with psychic phenomenon, it's very difficult to test because how it happens, when it happens, it how more than 90% of the time is not in the control of the person performing that act. I think the Joe McMonaghan, for example, is the only remote viewer who could do things as a test. Okay, and he has 84% accuracy, which is like phenomenal. Otherwise, normally psychic phenomena fails when you want to test it.
Whether or not Geller was a fraud then is besides the point. We have stumbled on a potential that eclipses the investments and institutions of our culture. The full extent of the power of suggestion has just barely been touched upon. Creative logic has been glimpsed. A new aspect of concrete operational thinking has opened. The key to a logic of survival has opened into plain view. Knowing the intricacies and skill, the long training and hard work necessary to get the hand quicker than the eye, a legitimate stage magician would never have conceived of asking someone just to imitate him without going through the arduous training. Can you imagine the great Arthur Rubinstein, before one of his uncanny concerts, even conceiving of the notion of inviting his audience to bring along their Steinway or Baldwin grand pianos, and just by listening and watching him play as he played? Yet this is what Geller did. Surely he gave many hints of extreme naivety, such as accepting, then aiding and abetting the ridiculous suggestions pumped into him by friends that flying saucer people were responsible for his effects. Surely Geller added to all this and helped build a nonsensical myth that made one cringe with embarrassment. But one reason he proved so gullible was that he had absolutely no idea how his genuine non-ordinary phenomena happened and very little control over whether they happened or not.
You get that? So he didn't have control. Psychic phenomenon very difficult to control. It sometimes will happen, sometimes it won't.
I qualify his acts by saying genuine because it may be that he had low periods during which he padded natural phenomena with plain trickery. But this is besides the point. Examine the sequence.
So now again, ego starts playing up over here, right? Now, many times when the thing was not working, the guy used to use trickery. And then people caught on to that trickery, assuming that the times when he was genuinely performing it was also trickery.
Examine the sequence. An outrageous and impossible suggestion was given over a television network reaching approximately 30 million people, including children of the critical age bracket, for being highly susceptible to suggestion. The given suggestion fell squarely into the category of concrete operational thinking in its most tangible form, and the suggestion itself fell into the category of need appropriate to the intent of this period. Television, the medium through which the children received this suggestion, was or is the most powerful influence of their lives, every bit as powerful to them as the Balinese rituals in that culture. Television has largely supplanted not only parents as models for imitation, but also the child's ordinary fantasy play projections. Furthermore, television has entered into the structuring of the child's primary worldview. Indeed, it may be the principal structuring element. Although the resulting shallow, two-dimensional worldview ordinarily cripples the emerging primary worldview, in the Geller case, with his modeling directly before the children, this tool of enculturation backfired. Happy accident. No one involved in Geller effects has the slightest idea how the phenomena occur, no more than the Ceylonese understand how they walk fire. Geller effects take place without a person doing anything and often without a person even willing anything to happen. Concrete operational forms of reversibility thinking are not necessarily conscious or controllable. We can function that way, but we cannot analyze the structure by which such reality experience takes place. Concrete operations are another state-specific unfolding of abilities that must be nurtured in order to be activated and developed. Given the suggestion through the most powerful medium for suggestion in their lives, the so-called Geller children saw and did likewise, just as the Balinese child did, and for much the same reason. They were imitating, just as they had done in imitative play for years.
Can we stop now? It's 5:30. 164.
Yeah, okay.
Any questions over here? The main thing in the thing is that the concept of reality, what is the building block and how do the children conceive reality, that is what forms their reality. So the conceptualization and the concretization of that reality becomes very, very important. And the more the children play, the more abilities that they can develop at the end of the day. Anyone has to say anything? Please unmute yourself and say.
That's pretty clear.
Everyone clear? No one saying anything?
No, yes, pretty clear.
Yeah. So we'll meet tomorrow 2:30 again, and we'll meet at 4 o'clock. Tomorrow, William will be coming on. I have to just connect with him again, but he is supposed to come on at 9:15. So just forward that message to anyone you know that would be interested in hearing him. Okay. And of course, you all know because you've logged in with the new code. So you all know that the code has changed. I deleted the meeting by mistake. Okay, so can we log off?
Sure.
Yeah. So we log off and we log on again at 4 o'clock, 5 to 4.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Ram Ram.
Ram Ram.
Bye.
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 Mhm.